Piers Morgan is back with the Israel-Gaza debate, this time hosting renowned Middle East analyst Omar Badar and libertarian Dave Smith, along with the Zionist journalist Emily Austin, in a debate where multiple points were expressed, notably around the recent hostage mission that resulted in the death of hundreds of Palestinians for the rescue of 4 Israeli hostages. So let's look over a few of these clips and we can discuss from there.
All you have to do is just reverse the scenario for just a moment, Piers. Right now, as you and I are speaking, thousands of Palestinians have been kidnapped out of the Gaza Strip and are placed in Israeli detention centers where they are undergoing daily torture. There's a piece in the New York Times exploring the absolutely horrific torture they're undergoing, including acts of sexual abuse that they are enduring. And right now, and by the way, several dozen of them have died in Israeli custody, almost certainly due to the abuse that they are enduring. And if you were to ask a question right now, is Hamas justified in invading Israel to rescue 4 Palestinian detainees out of the thousands that are held by Israel, and what kind of civilian cost would that be worth? Imagine that scenario, and imagine that several hundred Israelis were killed in the process. How many people would celebrate the release of those Palestinian prisoners?
Well, I would ask you,
and say,
okay,
great, the hostages are retrieved?
it's a valid point.
It's pretty clear as to what he's saying. There would be massive outrage. The only way you could think that this was efficient or a justified mission is if you inherently believe that Israeli lives are worth more than Palestinian lives. And almost 65 civilian death to 1 hostage rescued ratio is monstrous. And as a civilized Western nation, you would think it's something we would be fighting against, not sending billions of dollars to support. But again, because it's Arab casualties, people can easily just write them off as terrorists because of Islamophobia, despite the large portion of these deaths being women and children. The whole thing is a moral grandstand anyway, especially when Israel has thousands of Palestinian hostages and there isn't a peep from that side on the need to have them released or even justly treated. And for the only because of October 7th people who are going to be in the comments, 5,200 of those were held prior to October 7th, 3,660 were held without charge or trial, 200 being children, effectively being hostages while they are abused, killed for no reason, and subjected to torture on account of all human rights organization. But for some reason, Zionists only seem to care about the Israeli hostages. It couldn't be Islamophobia, could it?
Which, if we do flip all this round, and it had been the IDF who had gone over the border on October the 7th, murdered in the most horrific, barbaric manner, 1,200 Palestinians, the majority of whom were completely innocent people, kidnapped over 200 and brought them back into Israel, and wounded nearly 7,000 more, many of them catastrophically. Are you really saying that anyone on the Gaza Strip would have wanted any limitation put on Hamas for exacting revenge?
You are making an absolutely incredible point, Piers, because you don't have to imagine that scenario. Back in 2014, when Israel initiated a military operation against Gaza, they killed 2,200 Palestinians, including more than 550 Palestinian children, and that does create a sentiment within Gaza of people who want vengeance, and that's why you see some people react to October 7th as saying, what do you expect?
This is a wonderful response again, and what he's referring to is Operation Protective Edge, carried out by Israel, where upwards of 2,300 Gazans were killed, with almost 11,000 being injured, over 3,000 of those being children, with 1,000 of those children becoming permanently disabled. 70% of those casualties were civilians, and on top of that, 7,000 homes were completely destroyed, and 89,000 homes were partially destroyed. Does this sound kind of familiar? It's almost like this is what Israel systematically does anytime it sees the chance to get away with it. And it wasn't just because of October 7th. During this week long of attacks, only 67 IDF soldiers and 5 civilians were killed, with around 600 injured. You can see the imbalance from there. Or what about the 2018 March of Return protests that were largely peaceful, and the IDF killed 214 Palestinian civilians, 46 children, and over 36,000 were injured. Over 8,000 of those were hit by live ammunition from the IDF, and over 8,000 of those injured were children. Yet there's been no 10-month mission to eradicate the IDF from Palestinians that has resulted in tens of thousands of Israeli civilian deaths at the meantime. It all comes down to how Israel holds all the power in the imbalance, and they continue to choose to continue the cycle, knowing that violence only begets violence because they have the backing of America, and thus this cycle benefits them, always will, in their quest of ethnically cleansing the Gaza Strip.
The underlying fact that you can't get away from here is that this is an asymmetrical conflict. Israel has occupied Palestine since 1967. We're not talking about a few months after a war or even a few years after a war. We're talking about longer than the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Europe. And the idea that people say, well, if Hamas just surrendered today, the war would be over. Like, let's even say that's true, which I'm not convinced it is, but let's say that's true. And then what? Live in subjugation forever? I mean, look, the height of the Netanyahu doctrine was 2 weeks before October 7th, when he went to the United Nations with a map of greater Israel, including Gaza and the West Bank all being Israel. That was the peak of the Netanyahu doctrine.
He is spot on as well. As far back as 4 months prior to October 7th, Netanyahu had unveiled plans to annex the West Bank and put it in control of the Israeli settlers who were currently occupying the territory. So this idea of if Hamas surrenders, it'll all be over is silly when you actually think about what would be next for Palestinians, and it would be them being subjugated to second-class civilian living, settler control of their territory, and never receiving the autonomy or the state that they deserve, which is exactly why Netanyahu propped Hamas up in the first place, so he could move Palestine further from statehood and then use Hamas as a cudgel as to why Palestine should never deserve it. If you enjoyed this video, we're Social Society. We're a commentary channel influenced by politics, society, and the economy. We are pretty left-leaning on this channel, but we're open to our right-wingers as well. The biggest thing here is having conversations that get everyone to the bottom of the truth. If that sounds like something that could interest you, consider smashing that subscribe button, leaving us a like, or even commenting on this video. We even have memberships available as low as $3 if you'd like to support, because the only way we become a society is together.